The rain fell in sheets on the quiet town of Elmridge, Illinois, the night of October 29, 1988. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, slick with autumn's last breath. At Elmridge Middle School, laughter echoed down the halls, a stark contrast to the storm outside. The school auditorium buzzed with excitement and clapping. The final curtain had just fallen on the 8th grade production of Alice in Wonderland. Parents snapped photos, teachers praised performances, and students, still in costume, buzzed with adrenaline. In the center of it all stood Claire Whitmore, 12 years old, beaming in a blue dress and white apron. Her blonde hair was pulled back with a ribbon, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She had played Alice, and she had owned the stage. Claire was radiant, the kind of girl who made people pause without knowing why. In the crowd, 15-year-old Daniel Whitmore leaned against a wall, arms crossed, a proud smile on his face. Claire's older brother by 3 years, Daniel was quieter, introspective, more shadows than light. He rarely showed emotion in public, but tonight was different. Their parents, Margaret and Tom, had split duties, their mother handling refreshments, their father stuck in traffic from work. As the crowd thinned, Claire rushed to Daniel, threw her arms around him. "Did you see the Red Queen almost trip? I thought I'd lose it," she laughed. He ruffled her hair and said, "You were the best part. Everyone knew it." She grinned wider. Around 9:15 p.m., Claire told Daniel she was heading backstage to change. She vanished into the hallway toward the dressing rooms, the last time anyone remembered seeing her. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, take a moment to subscribe, because what unfolds in this story is unlike anything you've ever heard, and you won't want to miss a single detail. The rain kept falling. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Daniel waited in the main lobby, growing more impatient by the minute. He figured she was chatting, maybe still in costume, soaking up compliments. But by 9:45, with the auditorium nearly empty and the janitor locking doors, something didn't feel right. He walked backstage. The dressing room lights were still on, makeup bags and discarded costumes strewn across the counters. Claire's dress lay folded on a chair, her school bag rested beneath it, her coat hung untouched on the hook, but Claire herself was gone. Daniel searched the bathroom, the prop room, even peeked outside into the rain, calling her name. Nothing. At 10:10, he told their mother. Margaret froze, her smile evaporating. They searched the school together. A teacher called out Claire's name through the storm. By 10:30, the police had been notified. At first, the officers assumed Claire had left with a friend, wandered off in the excitement. Maybe she'd gone home with another parent by mistake, but those assumptions unraveled quickly. No friend had seen her leave. No parent recalled giving her a ride. Every other student had been accounted for. By midnight, the school was surrounded by flashing lights. Dogs were brought in. A helicopter circled overhead. Volunteers combed nearby woods. The small town of Elmridge transformed overnight, from safe and sleepy to anxious and suspicious. Claire was the kind of girl people remembered. Kind, brilliant, slightly eccentric in a charming way. She had a habit of reciting lines from books, doodling labyrinths in her notebooks, naming birds in Latin. No one believed she'd run away. And yet, there was no sign of struggle, no broken window. No scream heard, just a vanishing, sudden and complete. The next morning, her story was on the front page of the local paper. Star student disappears after school play. Her face, smiling and lit by stage lights, stared out from the photo, a haunting reminder of how quickly everything can change. As the days passed, the town mobilized, flyers went up, press conferences were held. But the longer she remained missing, the darker the speculation became. Was it a kidnapping? A targeted act? A mistake? Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the last few minutes. Her voice, her laughter, her hugging him. Something felt off even then. He remembered catching a glimpse of someone near the stage door, a tall figure in a long coat, too old to be a student, unfamiliar. He told the police, but the description was vague. It led nowhere. By Halloween, the town's decorations felt grim. The laughter of trick-or-treaters was quieter. Parents held their children tighter. And the Whitmore house, once filled with music and warmth, grew cold. Claire was gone. No ransom. No trail. No goodbyes. Just silence. By the morning of October 30th, Elmridge was no longer the town it had been just days before. The sidewalks that once echoed with bicycles and chatter were now lined with searchers, police tape, and reporters. The local diner, usually filled with talk about harvests and football scores, buzzed instead with theories, panic, and questions that had no answers. At the Whitmore house, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of coffee she wouldn't drink. Her hands trembled. Her eyes were bloodshot. She hadn't changed clothes since the night of the play. Tom paced the hallway in a daze, speaking into the phone with every contact he could think of. Colleagues, old friends, anyone with influence. The house was filled with people, yet empty in all the ways that mattered. Outside, dozens of volunteers gathered. Local teenagers joined search parties, combing through the surrounding woods, creeks, abandoned buildings. The fire department mapped out grids. Helicopters swept over nearby farmland. Bloodhounds traced Claire's scent from the school's back entrance, only to lose it by the service road, where the pavement turned to gravel. It was as if she had been lifted off the face of the earth. The school reopened 2 days later under a thick shadow. Claire's classmates returned hushed and afraid. Teachers tried to maintain normalcy, but no one could focus. Her desk sat untouched. Her locker remained closed. Some students whispered rumors. One said Claire had a secret admirer. Another swore they saw a van parked behind the gym. None of it led anywhere. Detectives interviewed every teacher, student, janitor, and parent who had attended the play. A few remembered seeing a tall man near the stage doors. Some thought he was a parent. Others didn't recognize him. No one had a clear description. He was a ghost in everyone's memory. Daniel sat through his own interview twice. He told them everything he remembered. The hug, the joke about the Red Queen, the moment Claire walked away, and the man in the coat. But when pressed, the image in his mind turned to fog. He couldn't recall his face, only that he felt wrong. As days turned to weeks, the town's hope began to sour. News vans returned less frequently. Posters faded on telephone poles. Halloween decorations were quietly taken down. November came with its bite of cold, and with it, the realization that Claire might not be coming home. Margaret stopped speaking altogether. She sat in Claire's room, sometimes for hours, sometimes until morning, staring at her daughter's books, her stuffed rabbit, the fading poster of Anne of Green Gables above her bed. She couldn't understand how someone could just vanish, without a scream, without a sign. Tom became a man obsessed. He created a timeline on the dining room wall, filled notebooks with phone logs, and drove across the state chasing down false leads. When someone reported seeing a girl that looked like Claire in a diner outside Rockford, Tom drove 3 hours without blinking. It wasn't her. Daniel tried to be the glue, but he was only a boy. He stopped going to school. Friends stopped calling. His world became silent, grey and inward. Sometimes he'd ride his bike to the school, park across the street, and just watch it, as if Claire might come walking out at any moment, brushing her hair behind her ear, laughing at something only she found funny. In private moments, he began to wonder if anyone truly knew his sister. Her diary, which their mother had taken, revealed only fragments, notes about school, daydreams about traveling, a few cryptic entries he didn't understand. One said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched, but when I turn around, nothing's there." Another read, "I miss who I was before I got the part." Daniel held on to that one for weeks. What did she mean? Was someone bothering her? Had she been scared? If so, why hadn't she told him? The police explored every angle. Was it someone from the school? A parent? A stranger passing through? But there were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no ransom note, no blood, no clues. And so the case grew cold. Files were boxed, detectives were reassigned, the search dwindled. By the time Christmas lights appeared in windows, people stopped asking. Life demanded to move forward, even if the Whitmores couldn't. Elmridge healed on the surface, but beneath, a scar lingered, the kind you can't point to, but feel every time the wind changes. And in that silence the Whitmores lived, fractured, hollow, and waiting for the phone to ring. Waiting for a knock at the door. Waiting for something, anything that never came. 4 years passed, and with them, the sound of Claire's name faded from the streets of Elmridge. People stopped whispering in grocery aisles. Teachers no longer paused when roll was called. Even the flyers, once bright with urgency, had become sun-bleached ghosts on back alleys and telephone poles. But for Daniel Whitmore, time didn't move forward so easily. By 1992, he was 19, living mostly inside his own mind. He drifted through community college classes without direction. His room, once shared with posters of bands and scribbled lyrics, was now lined with news clippings, police sketches, and maps of the school. Every morning he awoke with the same question: where is she? Home had changed. The Whitmore family was no longer a unit. Margaret and Tom had divorced 2 years earlier, their grief driving them in opposite directions. She stayed in Elmridge, quiet and ghost-like, keeping Claire's room exactly as it was. He moved to southern Indiana, remarried, and rarely called. When he did, the conversations were brief and always ended the same way. We did what we could. Daniel didn't believe that. Not anymore. Claire's absence wasn't just felt in their home, it lived in it. The hallways echoed with her voice in memory. Her laughter seemed to cling to the walls, like the scent of her perfume still trapped in her old pillowcase. Sometimes Daniel would sit in her room at night and play the music box she used to love, its delicate chime filling the silence like a heartbeat. He never stayed long. The feeling was too heavy, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. That winter, a woman contacted the Whitmores. She claimed to be a psychic. Her name was Judith Hale from Missouri. She'd seen a television segment about Claire's case and said she felt pulled toward it. Daniel was skeptical, but his mother clung to the hope like a lifeline. They met Judith in the living room, surrounded by photographs of Claire and candles Margaret had lit herself. Judith closed her eyes and whispered things no one outside the family should have known. Claire's favorite book, the way she used to hum while brushing her hair, the name of her stuffed rabbit, Thistle. Daniel sat in stunned silence. Judith said she could sense Claire in between, not gone but not reachable by normal means. She said Claire was near water, surrounded by darkness, whispering for help. Daniel didn't believe in psychics, but he couldn't ignore the chill that crawled down his spine. That night, he had a dream. He was in the woods behind the school, standing at the edge of a dark lake. Fog rolled over the surface. From somewhere far off, he heard Claire's voice, faint, melodic like wind through branches. "I'm still here," she said. "Don't stop." When he woke, his hands were shaking. He couldn't explain it, couldn't dismiss it. Weeks later, he went back to the lake near the old train tracks, a place he and Claire had once played as kids. He stood there for hours, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. But the feeling stayed with him, like a weight pressing into his chest. He started having the dream more often. Sometimes Claire was calling, sometimes crying, always from the other side of something, glass, water, trees, always unreachable. He started looking back through everything, her notebooks, her sketch pads, her music box. He remembered that after her disappearance, one item had never been recovered, her music box, but he had it now. Margaret said she found it tucked behind a dresser when she cleaned Claire's room months after she vanished. But Daniel had looked there himself, many times. And then there was her locker. Daniel remembered vividly. It had been cleared out the day after she went missing. Not just emptied, but sanitized, scrubbed clean, as if no one had ever used it. The janitor said he was just following orders from the principal, but Daniel found it odd. Claire had kept drawings there, notes, stickers. All of it was gone. He asked himself questions no one else seemed to be asking anymore. Why was her costume left neatly folded, but her shoes were never found? Why had there been no fingerprints on her backpack? Why did the lights in the backstage corridor flicker that night, something he only recalled now, years later? And what did she mean in her diary when she wrote, "He watches me after rehearsal. I don't like the way he smiles"? The questions formed a maze in his mind, one he walked every day. Every possible exit led back to the same place, nowhere. But something was shifting. He could feel it. As if the silence was no longer content to stay silent, the attic in the Whitmore house had always been a forgotten place, dusty, cramped, full of boxes no one dared open. But in the summer of 1997, when Daniel returned home to help his father sort through the remnants of the past, the attic became something else entirely. Tom had moved back to Elmridge after his second marriage fell apart. The old house had sat mostly untouched for years, a frozen time capsule of a family that no longer existed. Daniel was 24 now, leaner, quieter, and with eyes that rarely rested. He didn't speak much during the first day of sorting, and neither did his father. They moved through old books, bags of clothes, boxes of Christmas decorations, silenced their shared language. It was on the second day that Daniel found the crate. It sat in the farthest corner of the attic, behind stacks of National Geographics and broken lamps. The box was wooden, sealed with heavy black tape, and marked with a single word in fading ink. Claire. Daniel stared at it for a long time. He didn't remember ever seeing it before. With trembling hands, he pulled the tape away. The lid creaked as it opened. Inside, wrapped in a pale blue scarf, was Claire's missing music box, the one they thought had disappeared the night of the play. Its porcelain ballerina was cracked, but when Daniel turned the key, it still played the delicate tune she loved. He hadn't heard that sound in nearly a decade. Beneath the music box lay a small, spiral-bound notebook, Claire's diary. Daniel hesitated before touching it. When he opened the cover, he found her familiar handwriting, looping, cheerful, unmistakably hers. Most entries were light and simple: schoolwork, play rehearsals, thoughts on books she was reading. But as he neared the final pages, the tone changed. Something feels wrong lately. Like someone's always just behind me. He says I'm the best Alice he's ever seen, but I hate how he stares at me, like I'm not real. I don't think I want to be in the play anymore. But if I quit, he'll be angry. I know it. Then, abruptly, the writing stopped. The last page was a half-finished sentence. I saw him again. That was it. Daniel stared at the page until his eyes blurred. The silence in the attic grew louder, like the house itself was holding its breath. At the bottom of the crate was a torn piece of thick paper, folded several times. He unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, made in pencil and watercolor, of a stage. The same one from the school auditorium, but it wasn't drawn like a child's sketch. It was detailed, precise. Symbols circled the stage's outline, strange runes he didn't recognize. Tiny notes in Claire's handwriting surrounded them. Doors, curtain, mirror space, sound lines. And in the corner, "This is where it happens." Daniel felt a cold weight in his stomach. He placed everything back in the box and took it to his room. That night, he didn't sleep. He read the diary again. He studied the map. The symbols made no sense to him. They weren't mathematical, weren't musical, but they felt intentional. He searched through old yearbooks, trying to find something, anything, about the play. He compared cast lists, dates, directors. Everything pointed back to one person, Mr. Richard Liddell, the school's longtime drama teacher. Claire had written about him in her diary without naming him, but the context was clear. Daniel remembered Liddell. He was charismatic, theatrical, and deeply involved in every production. He had a way of making kids feel special, chosen. At the time, it had seemed harmless, encouraging even. But now, in the dark of his room, Daniel saw it differently. He found Liddell's contact information through an alumni newsletter. He'd retired in 1993 and was living in a small town 2 hours south. Daniel called, left a message. No response. He tried again. Still nothing. On impulse, he drove down to the old school building, now closed and awaiting demolition. Weeds curled around the fence. The auditorium's windows were boarded shut. But the front door was loose, and Daniel knew the layout well. He walked the dark halls with a flashlight. The school smelled like mold and rot. Posters still hung on the walls, curling at the edges. He made his way to the auditorium, where the air felt heavier. In the back, near the dressing rooms, he found a locked door marked storage. The padlock was rusted. He pried it off. Inside were old costumes, broken props, dust thick as snow, and on the ground, partially buried under fabric, was a small silver chain. Claire's necklace, the one she'd worn the night she disappeared. Daniel held it in his palm, his heart pounding. The silence pressed in around him. And then faintly, so faintly he thought he imagined it, he heard the music box chime echoing from somewhere deeper inside the building. Daniel stood frozen, the silver necklace resting in his hand, its chain tangled and dust-streaked. It was unmistakably Claire's, a tiny locket shaped like a book, engraved with the words "Always Wonder." Their mother had given it to her before the play, and Claire had worn it constantly. Seeing it now, buried in forgotten fabric and dust, sent a surge of nausea through him. He pocketed the necklace and turned off his flashlight. For a moment in the darkness, he listened. The faint chime of the music box had vanished. The silence that followed was so deep it felt unnatural, like the building itself was holding its breath. Back at home, Daniel laid everything out on the floor: the diary, the stage drawing, the necklace. His mind returned to the strange symbols surrounding the stage in Claire's sketch. The layout wasn't arbitrary, it mirrored something. He searched the school's old blueprints online, digging through archived planning documents, floor plans from the 1960s. That's when he saw it. Beneath the auditorium, before the 1985 renovations, there had been a sub-basement, sealed off during a budget cut, a forgotten space. And its shape matched Claire's drawing exactly. The realization struck him with cold certainty. Claire knew about that space. He printed the layout, marked the points that matched her diagram. The symbols she'd drawn didn't resemble anything Daniel recognized, not runes, not letters, but the way they circled the stage mirrored architectural notations, almost like a guide. Daniel called the Elm Ridge Historical Society. He asked about the sub-basement. A man named Ellis in his 70s answered, said the space had been part of the original building used as a storm shelter, then bricked off when mold and decay made it unsafe. "Hasn't been touched in decades," he said. "Nobody ever goes down there, no way in anyway." But Daniel knew there had to be a way. He returned to the school that night, this time with tools. He retraced his steps, found the rear dressing room and tapped along the walls. Hollow spots echoed beneath his knuckles. After an hour, he discovered it, a section behind the costume shelves boarded in. He pried it loose, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into dark stone. The air was heavy with rot. Each step creaked beneath his weight. When he reached the bottom, he found a hallway, narrower than expected, lined with rotting theater props, rusted equipment, and layers of dust undisturbed for years. Near the back was a small room. Daniel stepped inside and froze. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them curling at the edges, yellowed with time, children in costumes. All smiling, all staring directly into the lens. Each had a date written in red ink: 1974, 1978, 1982, 1988. Claire's photo was there, in her Alice dress, arms folded, head tilted just slightly. The date below it, October 29th, 1988. Daniel's heart pounded as he scanned the others. Some faces he recognized, kids who'd gone missing from neighboring towns, kids he remembered seeing on milk cartons. All with the same date format, all in costumes. And beneath each one, faint symbols, the same as Claire's diagram. In the center of the room was a broken mirror, propped on a chair, its surface smeared. Behind it, a table. On it, old scripts, casting sheets, and a thick leather-bound journal labeled Liddell. Daniel flipped through it. Inside were pages of obsessive notes, not about school plays but about performances as offerings. He read fragments. The child must be chosen during solstice alignment. The stage is the conduit. Eyes must reflect belief. Costume seals identity. They do not age once through the threshold. They remain eternal, preserved. Daniel recoiled. None of it made sense, and yet it did. Claire's unease, her diary entries, her drawing, her necklace buried here next to evidence that suggested something more than obsession, something ritualistic, even cultic. The next morning, Daniel drove to the address he'd found for Richard Liddell. It was a quiet house outside of Lockport, overgrown lawn, shutters closed. He knocked. No answer. He waited. Finally, the door creaked open. Liddell was older, gaunter than Daniel remembered. His once theatrical presence reduced to a twitchy man in a threadbare robe. When Daniel introduced himself, Liddell's expression changed, not to surprise, but to something closer to dread. Daniel asked him about Claire, about the drawings, about the photos. Liddell refused to speak at first, but Daniel pressed harder. "You were there," he said. "Have you watched her disappear?" Liddell trembled, eyes wide. "I never touched her," he whispered. "I guided, that's all. The rituals, they were older than me." "What rituals?" But Liddell shook his head. "They chose the girl. She was perfect. The mirror isn't broken, just closed. You wouldn't understand." Daniel left, heart pounding, mind racing. He had proof. Claire's photo, her necklace, her diary. The police wouldn't ignore this. He was going back, and he wasn't going alone. Daniel returned to the sub-basement with the police 2 days later. He had delivered everything: the photos, Claire's necklace, the journal, and the statement from his conversation with Liddell. At first, the detectives were hesitant. The language in the journal bordered on delusion, and Liddell's mutterings offered little clarity. But once they saw the hidden room, the evidence on the walls, their tone shifted. Crime scene tape was stretched across the narrow stairwell. Flashlights swept the darkness as officers catalogued the items inside. Forensics marked and bagged each photograph, measured each footprint in the dust. Daniel watched in silence, heart pounding with every discovery. A forensics expert confirmed the necklace was indeed Claire's. Her fingerprints were found on the music box. The photos were real. And the journal, filled with unsettling rituals, strange theater symbolism and cryptic language, was being analyzed for connections to known cult groups. But it was what lay beneath the floorboards that changed everything. An officer, tapping along the wooden panels, heard a hollow resonance beneath a far corner of the room. Carefully, they pried up the boards. What they found underneath wasn't a body, but a shallow pit filled with more props, costumes, and personal objects, items linked to missing children from other towns, a shoe with a name tag from Kansas, a library card from Indiana, a bracelet engraved, "To Emma, love Mom." The horror expanded. It wasn't just about Claire anymore. Daniel watched as the room turned from strange relic into a potential crime scene spanning years and states. Liddell was taken into custody for questioning. He denied involvement in any physical harm, but confessed in scattered fragments to leading children into the process. He spoke of thresholds and mirror rights, of preserving the performance beyond time. The police tried to press for concrete details, but Liddell descended quickly into incoherence, citing phrases from Shakespeare and muttering lines from school plays as if he couldn't distinguish memory from madness. But Daniel couldn't shake one sentence from their conversation. "The mirror isn't broken, just closed." He returned home and began rereading Claire's notes, her drawings. The mirror was a recurring symbol, not just a reflective surface, but a passage, an object of transformation. He looked again at the broken one in the sub-basement. It wasn't shattered, just cloudy, like glass covered in smoke. And he remembered the moment years ago when he thought he'd heard her voice, the music box, the whisper. Claire had written, "He watches me after rehearsal," but she'd also written, "I miss who I was before I got the part." Something had changed her. Something had begun before the night she vanished. Daniel started to study the mirror more closely. He visited libraries, researched obscure theatrical traditions, symbolism in performance art. One phrase kept recurring in his research: the fourth wall. Traditionally, it was the imaginary barrier between actor and audience. But in ancient theater mysticism, some believed it was literal. A veil, a space where stories, when performed with ritual, blurred the line between fiction and reality. It was rare, esoteric, but some sources spoke of mirrors as gateways, tools used to bind the actor in the role and preserve the presence beyond the play. He returned to the school again, alone this time. The room had been sealed off, but he still had the key he'd used to enter before. He stepped down the staircase once more, into the cold quiet beneath the stage. Everything had been cleared out, tagged and removed, but the mirror remained. Its frame was ornate, old, not part of any school production Daniel remembered. Its glass was dark, fogged like a storm on the other side. He stood before it and whispered Claire's name. Nothing happened. He pulled the music box from his coat pocket and wound it. As the melody filled the air, he whispered again, "Claire." This time something flickered. The glass pulsed faintly. A shimmer moved across its surface like ripples in a pond. Daniel stepped closer. The music played on, growing slower, more dreamlike. Then he saw it, not a reflection, not exactly, but a glimpse of a face. Her face pale, eyes wide, hair floating gently as if underwater. Claire. He froze, tears rising to his eyes. She looked the same, not aged, not changed, trapped in that eternal moment. She raised a hand to the glass. Her lips moved. He couldn't hear the words. The mirror quivered. Then the image was gone. Daniel fell to his knees, heart pounding. She was there, not gone, not dead, somewhere else, just beyond. He returned home trembling. The image burned into his memory. He knew what he'd seen. He had felt it, and for the first time in 9 years, hope, wild, impossible hope, ignited in his chest. Daniel spent the next few days in a kind of suspended disbelief. Everything else faded into background noise, meals, sleep, time itself. The image of Claire in the mirror, so real, so vivid, replayed over and over in his mind. He wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't delusional. She was there. Trapped somehow, not gone. And she had seen him. He revisited every piece of her diary, searching for overlooked clues. He noticed something new now, repeated references to reflections. "I don't like mirrors anymore," she wrote once. "I feel like they remember things I forgot." And in another entry, "It's like the play never ended. We're still in it." Daniel needed help. But not from police or academics. He found himself dialing the number scribbled in the back of an old folder. Judith Hale, the psychic who had once visited his family. She answered on the third ring. He didn't need to explain who he was. "I've been expecting your call," she said softly. "She's close, isn't she?" They met at a diner on the edge of town. Judith looked older now, but her voice carried the same calm gravity. Daniel told her everything, the music box, the sub-basement, the mirror, Claire's image. Judith listened without interrupting. "There are thresholds," she said, "places where the veil is thin. What you saw is real. Claire is caught between. Time works differently where she is." "Can she be brought back?" Daniel asked. Judith hesitated. "Possibly, but not easily, and not without risk." He pressed her. She finally relented, speaking in hushed tones about a forgotten sect from the 1920s, performers who believed in immortalizing art by binding the performer to the role, literally. It was theater, ritual, and mysticism fused together. Some called it cult-like, others called it cursed. They performed only during celestial alignments, using mirrors as conduits. She called them mirror rites, a kind of metaphysical performance. The theory was this: if the ritual was reversed, through symbolic recreation, focused intention, and a personal tether, the spirit might be released. The tether, Daniel asked. Something she loved, something she trusted, something that holds part of her still. The answer was immediate. The music box. Judith gave him names of people to contact, historians, folklorists, a retired professor who had once written about theatrical liminality. Daniel spent days traveling, calling, reading, learning the structure of the original rites. It wasn't just about mirrors. It was about space, time, sound, and memory. The performance had to be invoked again, but inverted. Not as a show, but as a retrieval. And the date mattered. The original ritual occurred on October 29th, 1988, during a rare planetary alignment. The next would occur exactly 9 years later. It was already September. Back in Elmridge, Daniel visited the school again. The building was still under investigation, but he knew the layout better than anyone. He memorized every corridor, every door, every angle of the auditorium. Then he began visiting Claire's room again. He sat on her bed, wound the music box, let the song play. He lit candles, spoke aloud, read her diary entries like prayers. Sometimes he felt something change in the air, a shift. Once the music box began playing on its own. Another time he swore he heard humming, not from the box but from the mirror in the hallway. The barrier was thinning. He kept dreaming, always the same dream. A forest, a lake, fog curling like fingers. Claire standing at the water's edge, barefoot, wearing her costume. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Please." One morning, Daniel awoke to find the mirror in his hallway cracked, not broken but webbed like frost. The crack curved around the center, creating an oval, just like the mirror in the sub-basement. Then came the message. He was sorting through a folder of Claire's artwork when he noticed a new paper tucked inside, one he swore hadn't been there before. It was another sketch of the stage, but this time a door had been drawn open. Claire's handwriting said only, "You found me. Don't leave me here." Daniel sat in silence for a long time. He didn't know how it was possible, how messages could pass across glass, how dreams and drawings could breach time. But it was happening. She was reaching out. And now, everything was aligning again. October was only weeks away. He had the music box, he had the diary, he had the location. He would return to the place it all began. And this time, he wasn't going to watch her disappear. October 29th, 1997. 9 years to the day. Daniel stood outside the gates of Elmridge Middle School, the autumn wind curling around him like smoke. The building loomed ahead, long abandoned and scheduled for demolition, its windows dark and hollow. It was a place haunted by silence, by memories, by what was taken and never returned. He carried only a few things: Claire's diary, the music box, the stage map she'd drawn, and a small bundle of her belongings, the ribbon she wore in the play, her locket, and a photograph of the two of them as children. The time was just past 11 p.m. He entered the building through the same side door he'd used weeks before. The air was colder now, the silence deeper. He moved carefully through the halls, stepping over fallen tiles and debris. Each footstep echoed like it might wake something hidden in the walls. When he reached the auditorium, the room welcomed him with stillness. The stage was untouched, its wood warped and faded. He walked to the rear dressing room and descended once more into the hidden corridor behind the costume shelf. The mirror still stood, resting in the center of the empty room. He took a slow breath and placed the music box on the floor. Then he opened Claire's diary and began to read. Not the dark entries, but the early ones, the light-hearted thoughts of a 12-year-old girl. Notes about books, drawings, poems, rehearsals. He spoke them aloud like incantations. When he reached her final page, the incomplete sentence, "I saw him again, His voice faltered, but he didn't stop. He opened the music box. Its melody filled the room like a ghost returning home. The air shifted. The mirror began to pulse with a faint glow. Daniel laid her photo beside the music box, then added the ribbon, the locket, and her sketch. He formed a circle around the mirror with the items, just as Claire had drawn it. He stepped back. Nothing. Then a flicker. The mirror's surface rippled. The light in the room dimmed, not from any source, but as if the space itself exhaled. The music box slowed but continued playing, its chime bending strangely as if echoing through water. And then she appeared, Claire. Standing inside the glass, her hands pressed against it, her eyes wide but not frightened. She wore her costume, her ribbon, and her expression, astonished and aching. "Daniel," she mouthed. He stepped closer, tears already forming. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not leaving." The mirror brightened. A pressure filled the air, not painful, but dense, like gravity had doubled. Daniel could feel something pulling at him, not physically but emotionally, spiritually, as if the mirror wasn't just showing her, it was offering a way through. He reached forward and touched the glass. Cold, then warmth. Claire's hand met his from the other side, The mirror shuddered. Daniel heard a sound, not in the room, but inside his head. A chorus of whispers, familiar. Children. Lines from plays, laughter, cries, echoes, all swirling into a single hum of longing. He clutched the music box. The tune slowed to its final notes. The mirror flared. Claire began to fade, not away but forward, as if something was pulling her through. Her lips moved again. "Hold on." Daniel's vision swam. He felt himself leaning forward, the air rushing past his ears. Everything vibrated. The floor, the walls, the very air. It was like standing in the center of a storm that had no wind. And then, a blinding white. The music stopped. The mirror cracked. Daniel stumbled backward and fell. Silence. He opened his eyes. Smoke rose from the floor. The mirror's surface was fractured, its glow gone. The room was scorched. The paper edges of Claire's diary blackened, her ribbon burned, but the music box was still there, unharmed. He crawled toward it. Inside the mirror, there was nothing. Just a reflection of himself, alone. The silence rang louder than any scream. Daniel clutched the music box to his chest and sat in the darkness. She had been there. She had tried to return. But something went wrong, or something stopped her. And now, he wasn't sure what had been taken in exchange. Daniel awoke in a hospital bed 2 days later. He didn't remember who found him. He didn't remember the fire. He only recalled the moment the mirror shattered and the sensation of falling inward, into something that didn't follow the rules of time or space. The doctors told him he'd been unconscious when emergency services arrived, after a passerby saw smoke rising from the old school building and called it in. There were burns on his hands, smoke in his lungs, but otherwise, he was whole. The fire had consumed most of the sub-basement. Investigators ruled it accidental, faulty wiring near stored equipment. But Daniel knew the truth. Something had changed that night. Something had opened and closed. When he was released from the hospital, he returned home. The house felt heavier, but not colder. The air had shifted. In the attic, where he'd kept all of Claire's things, he noticed something immediately. The box had been moved, not by his father, not by the fire. Inside, atop the old papers and costume remnants, was a photograph. It hadn't been there before. It showed Claire, not as she had been, but older. A teenager, maybe 16. Her hair longer, her face more defined, but unmistakably her. She stood in front of trees, smiling, holding something in her hands. A ribbon. The same one from her play costume. Daniel dropped to his knees. It was impossible. And yet it was real. The photo was printed, aged, tangible. Not a dream, not a memory, a message. He turned it over, written on the back in Claire's handwriting. "Thank you." He stared at the words for a long time. They weren't a hallucination. They weren't imagined. Something had happened during the ritual, something incomplete perhaps, but something real. The mirror was gone, the basement destroyed, and still she had left this. Daniel didn't tell the police. There was no explaining it, no way to make it make sense. Instead, he tucked the photo into the inside pocket of his coat and kept it there, close to his heart. Days passed, then weeks, and then a call. His landline rang late one evening. When he picked up, there was no greeting, just static. He waited, confused. Then, cutting through the crackle, a single voice, faint but clear. Daniel. It was her. He said her name over and over until the line went dead. He stood in his kitchen for a long time, the receiver still in his hand, the hum of the dial tone like a heartbeat. Claire wasn't lost anymore. She wasn't dead. But where she was, what kind of existence she now inhabited, Daniel couldn't begin to understand. Still, the weight of hopelessness that had lived in him for 9 years was gone. She had survived. Changed, yes. Moved beyond the world he knew, maybe. But alive. He started writing. At first, just for himself. Pages and pages of memories, dreams, theories, timelines. Then he compiled it all into a single manuscript, The Mirror Between Us. He didn't try to sell it, but a local journalist heard about his story and interviewed him. The article went viral. People started reaching out, families of missing children, other survivors of strange events, even former students from Elmridge with unsettling memories of Liddell and his rituals. Authorities reopened several cold cases. Daniel testified where he could, guided investigators where to look. Some of the objects recovered from the sub-basement were traced back to other children, all missing between the 1970s and late 80s. Not all were ever found. But some families, after decades of silence, had names again. Stories. Closure. The school was demolished before winter. Where the auditorium once stood, now only flat ground and broken concrete remained. Daniel visited one last time before the demolition crews arrived. He placed the music box on the earth, wound it once, and let it play. As the notes faded, he whispered her name into the wind and smiled. He never saw Claire again. Not in mirrors, not in dreams. But the photo remained, the voice on the phone. The weight in his chest that had once been grief, now something softer, bittersweet, alive. Sometimes he swore he felt her nearby, in music, in silence, in flickers of light that didn't behave like they should. And in those moments, he remembered what she had said. Don't stop. So he didn't. Years passed. Elmridge changed. New businesses opened where old ones had closed. Their community center was built on the land where the school once stood. People moved on, or at least they learned how to carry their grief more quietly. But Daniel Whitmore became something else. Not a victim. Not a broken man searching for meaning. He became a voice. He finished his book. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a record. A map through shadows. It chronicled Claire's disappearance, the forgotten ritual, the mirror and what he saw. More importantly, it told others that sometimes what's impossible isn't false. It's hidden, misunderstood, waiting. The response was overwhelming. Readers from across the country reached out. Siblings, parents, people who had lost loved ones in ways that never made sense. Stories poured in. Missing time, voices in dreams, places that felt wrong. Daniel collected them. He organized them. And in time, he built something new. A foundation. The Threshold Project. Its mission wasn't just recovery. It was understanding. He partnered with psychologists, folklorists, private investigators. Together, they re-examined cold cases, reconnected families, and created space for stories that never fit conventional molds. And Daniel spoke. At libraries, universities, support groups. He never sensationalized. He never dramatized. He simply told the truth as he knew it. He always started the same way. I lost my sister. But not forever. Claire's photo, the one where she was older, remained framed on his desk. He never told anyone how it came to him. It was his tether, proof that love could reach through time, through silence, through things that no one had names for. He never married, never had children, but he didn't live alone. His life was full of purpose, of meaning, of the quiet certainty that his sister, wherever she now existed, was whole, free, and maybe that was enough. On the 10th anniversary of Claire's disappearance, Daniel stood on the edge of what used to be the auditorium, now a garden. There was a tree planted there, a willow with a plaque beneath it. To the ones who never came home, and the ones who never stopped looking. He placed the music box at its base and wound it one last time. As the notes played, a breeze passed through the leaves, gentle and warm. He closed his eyes. No visions, no voices, just peace. That evening, he recorded a final message for those who followed his story. If you've made it this far, he said, thank you. There are things in this world we don't fully understand. But love, it doesn't vanish, it echoes, it reaches. And if you listen closely enough, if you believe deeply enough, it finds a way back. He paused. And if this story touched you, if it made you feel seen or made you wonder what else is possible, don't forget to subscribe. Because there are more stories like this. Stories that ask questions others are too afraid to speak, and I'll be here to share them. He smiled gently. And if you're ready for another one, click the video on your screen now. The next story starts with a door that should have never opened. The screen faded, but the story stayed. In whispers, in memories, in mirrors. And sometimes, if the music box plays just right in the space between waking and sleep, you might hear her. Claire, still wondering, still shining, still home.